Welcome to the Unpacking Biblical Truth podcast, where through our Bible teaching series, we unravel the layers of biblical truth, one episode at a time. Let's journey together through the depths of Scripture. Here's Pastor Gomez.
Thank you for joining us in our study of the book of Genesis. Today we're in Genesis chapter 31. Last time we saw how Jacob worked 7 years with his uncle Laban to be able to have Rachel's hand in marriage. And then there was the old switcheroo that took place, and he was given Leah instead. And Laban tells Jacob that it's not custom to marry the younger daughter before the older. And Jacob is forced to work another 7 years for Rachel. And instead of one wife, Jacob ends up with 2 wives. And this is a recipe for disaster in the house and home of Jacob. We saw how these 2 sisters were in competition with one another. And you remember how Leah was fruitful in her womb, and she had no problem bearing children. And then there was Rachel, who was barren. So she gives her maidservant to have children for her. And then Leah gives her maidservant to Jacob as well. And by the time this childbearing competition is over, Jacob has 11 sons and 1 daughter. And it's time for Jacob to get up out of Laban's house so that he can make a home for himself and for his family. And as Jacob tries to come out of his father-in-law's house, he has a difficult time doing so. And many times it can be that as we get up out of the pot, that we end up in the frying pan of life. I don't know if you've ever experienced it to where you're going through a difficult time, and as you try and come out of that, the solution that you think is going to help get you to a better place actually lands you into an even worse situation. And if you can relate to that, then you'll be able to identify with Jacob here. We begin in Genesis chapter 31, beginning in verse 1, where it says, "Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all his wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable towards him as before." Here we see that Jacob's brother-in-laws are looking at his flocks that are increasing in number, and they see Jacob's wealth as their own. Jacob's wealth is going to become a source of friction with Laban's family. Even Laban's own attitude changes towards Jacob. Let me say that it can be difficult to be happy when others are doing better than we are. And to compare ourselves with that of others, it's a dangerous way to judge the quality of our lives. Because by comparing ourselves to others, we give jealousy a foothold. And the only way we can avoid jealousy is by rejoicing in others' success. Verse 3 goes on to say, "Then the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." What we see here is that the Lord speaks to Jacob, and he gives divine direction in Jacob's life. And we see that there are circumstances producing a divine discomfort in Jacob's life. Oftentimes we may experience divine discomforts in our life as well. And God allows circumstances in our lives, and it makes us uncomfortable in the environment right before he moves us out of that environment. No longer is that place comfortable, and we're glad to exit that place. You see, when a child is ready to be born, no longer is the womb a comfy place. Things become tight and restrictive, and the baby's like, get me out of here. And in our lives, when we're about to be birthed into a new season, oftentimes circumstances will arise. And no longer are we comfortable as we experience pressure. And as this divine discomfort becomes divine direction in our life. And we see that there's great relief as we exit that situation. And now we're happy to be able to do the things that we thought we'd never ever do. I want to tell you that God is working out his divine plan, and we're to submit to him and see as he works it out in our life. So Laban's not happy with Jacob, and that's okay. His brother-in-laws are envious of him, and that's okay. And things are starting to get tense, even better. So Jacob wonders what to do, and we see that the Lord gives him divine direction. Verse 4. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable towards me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father, yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Here we see that Jacob reviews all the circumstances before his 2 wives. And he lets them know that as Laban continued to change the strategy on him, that God continued to bless him regardless of the circumstance. So let me encourage you with this. No matter what opposition tends to come against you, I want you to know that there's no stopping God's blessing and favor on your life. God's power isn't limited to the economy or by the lack of fair play. He has the ability to thrive in your life even though others mistreat you. Verse 10. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift your eyes now and see, all the rams which leaped on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. So Jacob's telling them how the Lord has spoken to him and how God had met him down in Bethel. And verse 14 says, Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there still any portion of inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. Leaving home wasn't difficult for Rachel and Leah because their father had treated them as poorly as he did Jacob. And they wholeheartedly approved of Jacob's plan to take the wealth he had gained and to leave. They're totally submitted to follow him wherever God takes him. Verse 17 says, Then Jacob rose and set his sons on and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained. His acquired a livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household items that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed towards the mountains of Gilead. Here we see that the family is ready to leave. The camels are all warmed up, packed up, and ready to go. And Jacob is fearful that Laban is going to prevent him from leaving. So he escapes when his father-in-law is out shearing the sheep. And Rachel, she decides to steal some household items that belong to Laban. And verse 22 says, And Laban was told on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountain of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said to him, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Here we see that 3 days go by, and Laban is just getting wind of Jacob's departure. And by the time he chases after them, it takes him a week to catch up. And I can only imagine how angry Laban is. His kids are gone, his grandkids are gone, the flocks are gone, and not even a goodbye. What is this? I mean, and on top of all that, they took his idols. So Laban's no doubt upset. And we see that the Lord comes to him in a dream and he intercedes in this situation. And the Lord tells him to be careful how he speaks to Jacob. And we see the way God puts his hands and protection upon our lives. Even when Jacob makes a relational error and he leaves without notice, and even though Jacob makes mistakes and decisions motivated by fear, we see that the Lord still protects him through it all. God's hand is still upon Jacob. And just like God's hand is protecting your life, God loves you and he's for you. He's protecting you. You are his child. And God desires to bring you into the fullness of his will for your life. And sometimes we can respond in fear and we can make poor choices and bad decisions. And we may not trust God the way that we should and the way that he desires us to trust him. But God's going to continue to build us up in our faith. And he's going to continue to work with us even when we slip, even when we fall, and even when we fail. God is still willing to continue to work with us. And to whatever degree we're willing to work with God, he's going to meet us there. Here we see that Jacob departs in the middle of the night, and we see that God is still watching over him. Verse 25 says, "So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, 'What have you done, that you have stolen away unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword?'" He says, "We've been together for 20 years, and this is the thanks I get? You take off like a thief in the night?" In verse 27, he says, "Why did you flee away secretly, away from me, and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and song, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad.' And now you have surely gone, because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my goods?" Laban says, "If it wasn't for your God, you'd be in big trouble right now, buddy." And even though Laban acknowledges that God has spoken to him, he refuses to acknowledge God as his own. And to underline this point, Laban asks Jacob, "Why did you steal my gods?" And he lays this accusation against him. And in verse 31, "Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, 'Because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you.' For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them." Jacob was unaware that Rachel had sticky fingers. And when he says, "If you find anything of yours upon us, then the person who took it, go ahead and kill them." I'm sure at this point, Rachel had one of those uh-oh moments. And suddenly she's in panic mode now. And what is it that she's to do? Does she confess and apologize? Does she tell her husband what she's done? Does she come clean and return them, or what? So now all of Laban's men go in search of these things in the camp. And verse 33 says, "And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household items, but she put them in a camel's saddle and sat on them." What does it say that Rachel did? She sat on them? "And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, Let it not displease my Lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. And he searched but did not find the household idols. So not only did she sit on the stolen goods, but she lies to her father and says, the reason why I can't get up is because of my menstrual cycle. This girl is good. And Laban's like, too much info. That's fine. Just stay where you are. And he comes up empty-handed. And now we see the response from Jacob in verse 36. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin, that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night, there I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served your 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. Here we see that Jacob lets him have it. He's been waiting 20 years to say something, and now he has an opportunity to rebuke him. And he recounts all the ways he cared for Laban's flocks and how he served him with integrity. 14 years for his daughters and 6 years for the herds. He worked hard even after several pay cuts, and when an animal got attacked, he took the loss for it rather than splitting the cost with Laban. And he did more than what was expected of him. And he tells him, God has protected me and prospered me with the flocks. And he's bigger than your ability to manipulate the situations or the circumstances. And Jacob tells him how it is. And we see this tremendous faithfulness of God. And we serve the same God. He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now, there's a couple of things I like to make note of here. We see that Jacob did a good job in serving Laban, and his diligence paid off. And making a habit of doing more than is expected does pay off. First of all, it pleases God. It also earns recognition and advancement. And thirdly, it builds others' confidence in you. Fourthly, it gives you more experience and knowledge. And lastly, it develops your spiritual maturity. Verse 43. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore, come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. In spite of Jacob's observations, Laban continues to claim ownership of everything that Jacob has taken. And then he invites Jacob to make a covenant or a peace treaty with him. Verse 45. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap. Laban called it Jagar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name was called Gilead. Also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. If you afflict my daughter, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Here we see that Jagar, Sahadutha, and Gilead both mean witness heap, and Mizpah means watchtower. And so they pile up all these rocks, and what they're basically saying is, you stay on your side, and I'll stay on my side. And we're not allowed to cross these boundaries and do harm to either party. And God is our witness to this. Verse 51. Then Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. So this peace treaty is signed, and Laban departs with a kiss for everyone except Jacob. And in closing, I want you to know that God is bigger than our circumstances. He's looking out for us, and he loves us. Even when we make poor choices and bad decisions, God knows we're not perfect. He knows we're going to make mistakes. And he desires to work through those mistakes in our lives. And he wants to bring us through victoriously. As long as you're willing to work with the Lord, he's going to continue to build on the amount of faith that we have. Matthew 17:20 says this, and Jesus is talking here. He says, I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. When you consider a mustard seed is small, but it's alive and it's growing. And like a tiny seed, a small amount of genuine faith in God will take root, and it's going to grow to an even greater amount. And it's the power of God plus our faith that moves mountains. And Jesus said that even faith as small as an undeveloped and little mustard seed is sufficient for him to work with. And if we're feeling weak or powerless as Christians, it's important that we examine our faith. And we need to make sure that we're trusting God's power, not our own ability to produce results. Amen? Well, I hope this study has ministered to you and finds you well. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace.